Welcome to the Mindful Fire podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. My dad will be so grateful. See you next time on the Mindful Fire podcast.
Welcome to the Mindful Fire podcast, where we explore living mindfully on the path to financial independence and beyond. I'm your host, Adam Coelho, and I'm so glad you're here. On today's episode, we're rejoined by my friend Julia Lee, who joined us on episode 15 of the Mindful Fire podcast. In the fall of last year, Julia and I connected, and she shared that she was about to make a big change in her life. She was going to leave Google and pivot to a new career in the field of sustainability. And we thought it would be really cool for us to do a 2-part episode before and after she left Google. For the first episode, episode 15, we explore why she's making this change, how she's thinking about it, and how she's thinking about making the move into a new career in the field of sustainability. Today, we're almost exactly 6 months from when she left Google and took a 6-month sabbatical to rest, rejuvenate, and clarify her vision of what she wants to create for her life as she moves into this next chapter in the world of sustainability. In part 1 of our conversation, Julia and I caught up on all aspects of what has happened since we last spoke, what it was like in the last couple months as she was preparing to leave Google, how she was thinking and feeling about that, and then what it was like when she was on the other side, how she really prioritized rest and how she really needed to learn how to rest and to practice resting, just like you would practice anything else like meditation or the guitar or any other skill. We talk about how so many of us, even when we're resting, feel like we should still be doing something productive, learning something or growing in some way. Sometimes it's really important to just rest with no other agenda than to take care of ourselves. Julia shares how she embarked on some self-exploration to clarify her vision of what she wanted to create. She shares how she used the tools of journaling and networking, reaching out to people in the fields that she was looking into and asking them to tell her all about their life. All of those things allowed her to clarify her vision and ultimately settle on a particular field of sustainability that she's now working in. I really enjoyed this conversation with Julia. I feel like I learned so much every time I connect with her. I really hope that you enjoyed as well. You can find the full show notes for today's episode, including all of the books, resources, and links we discuss at mindfulfire.org/56. Let's jump into today's episode. Julia, welcome back to the Mindful Fire podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Adam. It's great to be back.
For the audience, this is part 2 of our conversation with Julia Lee. Part 1 you can find on episode 15, wherever you're listening to this. Part 1 was really all about how Julia was getting ready to make a big change in her life. She was going to be leaving Google, where she had worked for 6 years, and pursue a totally different path. And so we decided, when I found out that she was going to be leaving, I thought it would be really cool to do a 2-part series, a before she left and an after she left. And so now we're about 6 months post leaving Google, right, Julia?
Yeah, it's been almost exactly 6 months because end of July was the end of the 6th month. So yeah, we're entering the 7th month now.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. Anything to add to what we talked about in the first episode or what was going on in your life at that point?
I think it's just so funny now being at this point and looking back and seeing how much has changed and how much has shifted. Because when we first talked, I think I was really in this place of uncertainty. Like I knew that this was the right next step for me, but I really didn't know how it was going to go. And now being on the other side of it, spoiler alert, I just told you, but I accepted a job offer that I'm starting in September. And so it's pretty wild looking back on the journey and just seeing how all the different pieces fell into place and like how much sense everything makes looking backwards in a way that it didn't when you were still in the middle of it. So I think definitely a lot of learnings that have come out of that time that really excites to discuss with you, and just a lot of perspectives, I think, that have changed. But all in all, so excited to be where I am now, really grateful for the time that I had. And yeah, looking forward to unpacking that a bit with you here today. I think this is the first time that I've done any sort of out loud verbal reflection with a friend on it. It'll be fun. You're getting my thoughts raw and present.
That's fantastic. I appreciate you being willing to share your thoughts in this forum and looking back on this time. And originally you had planned to take 3 months off, and it turned out to be 6 months.
Yeah, the 6 months wasn't totally unplanned for, but basically the way I went about it, I said, okay, I'm going to leave Google and I'm going to give myself 3 months off of not doing anything, as in not job searching. I'm just going to take 3 months to completely, decompress, reset, research what's out there. Because one of my big goals was figuring out what specific sector of sustainability I wanted to transition into. So I spent a lot of time talking to people during those 3 months, but did not actively job search at all. And then I started in May. So I left at the end of January. So February, March, April was my 3 months of quote unquote nothing. And then May, June, July was the 3 months of job searching. And it's pretty funny because people tell you that it takes about 2 to 3 months to find a job. And I was hoping it would be sooner. But then now again, looking back, I'm like, wow, it literally took exactly 3 months. So it was a perfect 6 months off. But I set my start date as September 13th. And I was like, let me just enjoy this last month and a half completely anxiety free. Let me just really soak up the excitement of knowing I have a job coming in, tying up the loose ends for my sabbatical for the next couple of weeks, and then fully starting that next chapter, totally refreshed and ready to dive in.
That is fantastic. Well, I haven't said this to you yet, but congratulations on completing the 6 months sabbatical. And also congratulations on getting a new job. I'm excited to hear more about what you're doing, but maybe we'll save that for a little bit later. And for the audience, if you haven't checked out episode 15, I highly recommend checking it out. It's one of the most popular episodes on the podcast, and we'll give you a lot of context for the conversation that we are about to have. And so definitely check out episode 15, which you can find anywhere you're listening to this podcast or at mindfulfire.org/15. Before we get into what you did during the 6 month sabbatical, I would love to hear a little bit about what was the process like actually leaving Google. We had talked probably, I guess it was 3 months before you left, or maybe
it was
2 months.
Yeah, it was right after I had made the decision to leave and then was starting to tell people that I was going to leave. I think you were definitely one of the first work friends that I told I was leaving. So yeah, I don't know, I have to rewind in my brain because it's been so long and I feel like my life is so different now compared to what it was. But I told my team that I was leaving. I told my managers and my directors, I think in November, which is, when the episode came out, that I was planning on leaving, gave my reasons for why. And at this point, it was about a 2 month heads up. I was willing to work with them on a flexible leave date because I want it to be a good experience for the team. I'm not really someone who just drops the ball and runs. And they were obviously really understanding and supportive, even though it is a challenging situation anytime someone leaves the team. But I think that they knew that this is obviously the direction I wanted to go in with my career. This is what I had always talked about. So really grateful for their support. And then ended up telling the rest of my team the last working day before the Christmas holiday. And so it's funny how these timelines are just very, fortuitous maybe. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's kind of crazy how they line up. So told the team and basically decided on the end of January as my last day at Google. So had winter break, came back, and then basically had those 3-ish weeks to wrap up everything. I think if you're leaving a company, there's obviously most likely, hopefully, a checklist that the company will provide you on all the things that you need to get done. So I definitely went through that. Talked to, I think, as I mentioned last time, a lot of friends who had left Google and just got their tips on the practical, tangible things to wrap up. I really started figuring out my finances as well at that point in time, where how much am I contributing to my 401k? How can I max that out in my last month here? Figuring out when my health insurance ends. One of the cool things about Google is they offer free therapy. And I realized that the therapy benefits would end 45 days after my last day at the company. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to start therapy again because I'm going to get in for 2.5 months. I still have a month left at Google and I'm going through this big life transition. So might as well. So that was great. So really just figuring out how to get the most out of my time at Google so that I wasn't leaving feeling like there were still things undone or loose ends that I hadn't wrapped up. And it was really bittersweet. I don't really know like exactly when it hit me. I think I started notifying people throughout January in terms of the broader team and my sustainability newsletters. It was really heartwarming leaving Google. One of the big things that I realized is just so many kind messages that people sent me on the newsletter, the Trash Talk Sustainability newsletter I wrote. And then my team made me this just amazing card. And it was just so sweet, the messages people were leaving, because I think sometimes when you're at a company or you're in a phase of your life, like you're not really realizing the impacts that you're having because you're just constantly on that hamster wheel and you're constantly going. And then when you're breaking from that phase and there's this opportunity for reflection, both for yourself and for other people, and you can step back and just realize like, wow, here are all the things I've done at Google. Like, here are the ways I've influenced people. Here are the things that I've inspired. Here are the things I've achieved. It felt really good, to be completely honest. And I do feel like I left just feeling like it was a wholesome close to a chapter and not like I was running away from anything or leaving things unfinished. So all in all, it felt like a really just healthy transition.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I could definitely see it being quite a heartwarming feeling to receive all those nice messages from people, because I send those messages to people.
Send me one too, Adam. Yeah.
I'm sure. You're welcome. I don't remember what I said, but hopefully it was nice. But yeah, like I always make a point to send something to people, usually people that I have really interacted with at work or have made an impact on my life. But even just people that I like somewhat know, like it's just nice to wish them well in their next chapter. And so being on the receiving end of that must feel really good. And just a good reminder of like all the impact that you've had, all the people's lives who you've touched through your work with SIY, through your work with sustainability, and even just your normal work as a teammate. It's really easy to get caught up in the day to day and forget about all those things that you've done over the years, but that probably helps bring it back.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You mentioned a few practical things that you did, like figure out when your healthcare will end and the tip about the EAP benefit for therapy lasting an additional 45 days. Are there any other things that you figured out that might be helpful for someone to look into as they're leaving a job or transitioning out of a job? Not necessarily at Google, but anywhere.
I would say for other people who are thinking of making the jump, this is expanding on the tangible piece of things, but from, a broader framework in terms of how to think about it, I think it's really important to get clear on what your trade-offs are and what your non-negotiables are. Because let's say if you are looking to leave a company and just take time off, understanding what your practical needs are is super important, right? In order to get the most out of that time off, you want to create a safe container for yourself, which you can fully relax into. And so things like how you're going to pay the bills, how much money you have set aside in savings, right? How you're going to get health insurance when you're unemployed. I don't think that those things are unimportant. I don't think that they're things you should throw by the wayside. So there are things that you should figure out. But I'd also say that don't let the fear of losing that safety net stop you. Because for me, having gone through this, I realized that all of those things I was scared about losing, it was actually pretty easy to figure them out. I just really had to set aside money, and I've been using that money, and that's fine. I was able to get health insurance to my partner, or you can buy it on your own independently. You'll have health insurance. And I, to be honest, didn't even really need to use it that much. And making sure that you have an understanding of those practical needs, because that is the foundation that you're creating for yourself in order to then enjoy this period that you're giving yourself. Another really big thing that I worked on is just identifying what sorts of false beliefs are holding you back as well. For example, thinking, oh, if I leave this company, like with these amazing people, for example, I'm never going to find such cool people to work with again. Or I'm leaving a really well-paying job, especially if you work in tech and you're like, oh, like I'm not going to get paid as much. Or just like all these different false beliefs. And I think it's important to really figure out exactly what those are so that you can find ways to address them. And again, I would say like being on the other side of that and just thinking back, and I've been going through and reading some of my old journal entries and reading through all of these fears I had. And it's pretty funny. Like now I can look back and I can laugh because I'm like, wow, none of these came true actually. And the situation I'm in right now is far better than anything I could have imagined before for myself. I think that this situation came about because of a lot of the work I've been doing on my self-limiting beliefs and my ideas around worth and what I'm deserving of. That's a big one. I think that's the biggest thing holding people back is just these fears that are in your mind for a certain reason, but how can you work with those fears effectively and not let them stop you from, doing something that is deeply calling you? And I guess the last piece I'll say on this too is I think if you have this path that you want to follow and you're scared to follow it, another thing to remind is that when you're being really authentic to yourself and what you desire out of life, doors start opening for you. And I experienced this so much right when I left. I think, for example, like you asking me to be on your podcast, like that never would have happened if I didn't make this decision that felt true to myself of leaving Google and jumping into a new career path. I reached out to someone who was working within regenerative agriculture at Google within Google X. And I just was like having these conversations with a bunch of cool people working on sustainability before I left. I was like, let me make the most of these connections. And I reached out to this guy, really cool person. And then he offered to mentor me. He basically was like, hey, like, let's set up a recurring meeting for the next year. Let's set up a recurring meeting every quarter and just like check in. And I just want to know how you're doing. I was like, oh my gosh, cool. And things like this never would have happened if I hadn't been being super authentic and overcoming those fears in order to live a life in alignment. And again, if you feel like there is something that's calling you, once you start following that path, I firmly believe the universe then starts conspiring to find those opportunities to make those doors open for you and help you along the way.
Absolutely. Following your personal legend, right? From The Alchemist.
Oh, I haven't read that book, actually.
Oh,
it's on my to-read book. It's funny, Adam, because I have so many books on my to-read list that I was like, I'm going to read all these books during my sabbatical. And I maybe have read like 2 books during my sabbatical.
Sure, there were other things calling for your attention. When you said the conspiring in your favor, that's a quote from The Alchemist.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely resonate with that book then.
Oh, yeah. It's all about your personal legend, which is essentially your purpose and what you're being pulled towards in life. And it's awesome. It's an amazing book to read and reread because depending on what's going on in your life at the given moment, you will get something different out of the book. And so It's an amazing one.
I feel like I've heard that about that book specifically.
And the author has a great last name, Paulo Coelho. I call him Tio Paulo, even though he's not really my uncle, but maybe we'll meet one day. But that's so cool to hear that once you've made this decision and started walking down that path towards what's calling to you, that doors start opening and opportunities start falling into place. And I've experienced that many times in my life as well. So it's really cool to hear that. Let's shift gears now and talk a little bit about, you left Google.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what you did afterwards. The first 3 months, what was it like? What did it feel like? And what were some of the lessons that you found during that time?
Yeah. Well, I will say, I think even just the first week, it was pretty hard for me to settle into a rhythm of not a lot of things grabbing on my attention. So my brain was like on alert. I was like, okay, what do I do now? What do I do now? What do I do now? And I was like, no, this is part of the unwinding and the decompressing and like settling into this time of ease and flow. But overall, what I did, I cooked a lot. I slept a lot. I slept really well. I started working on more art. So this is something I started doing once COVID hit last summer. And then I just started diving more into art and painting and my creativity because that was a big area of focus for me. I learned a lot about money. So I have you to thank for this because you told me to read the book, The Simple Path to Wealth. And basically for 2 weeks, I sat with that book and with Investopedia in front of me and all of my different accounts and just was reading that book and looking up all the terms and figuring out how they applied to my personal portfolio. And I got to say, Adam, like my relationship to money now is a world of difference compared to where I was, even just 6 months ago. And so I definitely want to dive into that more with you because I think if I can get to this place of empowerment from basically not knowing very much at all, I would love to see if maybe there's parts of my story that could inspire other people. So yeah, that was a huge shift for me. And then just like figuring out investing and all of that and feeling financially literate is really exciting for me. And then the big piece was just figuring out what are my next steps within sustainability. So I spent the first 3 months talking to a bunch of people, just figuring out ways to reach out to cool people in the industry and have conversations with them around what they were doing. because I was trying to get clear on what area of sustainability do I want to go into. I think I signed up for LinkedIn Premium for a month for the free trial and just took advantage of that and messaged 15 people and got like 4 or 5 conversations out of that, which was amazing. I signed up for this online networking tool called Lunch Club. And it's cool. If anyone listening wants to invite to them, I'm happy to send them an invitation. And basically it matches you up with a random person every week if you want to sign up. And then you just have like a cool conversation with them. So it's like a little coffee chat type tool. And then just telling friends that I had left Google and was wanting to transition to sustainability. And then friends would introduce me to their friends or their family. One of my friends, his brother worked at Imperfect, which was so cool to hear about his story and what he was doing. And yeah, the more people I talked to, the more clarity I was starting to get. I was also considering going to grad school. So I ended up talking to a bunch of people who had gone to grad school, who were going to grad school. I ended up applying, ended up deciding not to go just based on other conversations that was happening. Overall, the theme of this time was a lot of exploring, a lot of learning, and also just a lot of recalibrating certain things. Like when I talk about resting and the creativity piece and getting clear on my vision and my intuition, like just resetting a lot of different frameworks in my mind that I'm really excited to walk into this next chapter having, because I do feel like the place I'm at right now is just so different on a lot of levels compared to where I was before. And I was recently reading through some of my journal entries from like the beginning of sabbatical. I'm like, wow, I don't deal with a lot of this stuff anymore. Like, especially a lot of the fears and anxieties that I had. I feel like I've just stepped so much more into a place of trust and worthiness and confidence in my own capabilities. And it feels really exciting to be here.
There's a lot there. So much good stuff.
I think one piece maybe we can start with is around rest, because that was a big theme, right? That was a big intention for taking the time off. And I know in the first episode I did with you, I talked a bit about it being okay to rest, that being one of my lessons coming out of COVID and how life-changing that was for me. But I don't think that I really understood it until I had so much time to unpack that. For the past couple of years, I've been dealing with some gut sensitivities and gut issues. And basically my gut microbiome has been a bit out of whack. And so that's led me to have these different food sensitivities. It went away and then it came back in 2020. I wasn't really dealing with it until earlier this year. And so I found a new doctor. She's a naturopathic doctor because I want to be working with the whole body system. And I was having my first conversations with her. She's asking all these questions about my health history and my lifestyle, all of that, to get an understanding of who I am as a person. And it was so interesting because this was like the big sort of aha moment for me, is she was asking me about my previous stress levels. And she was saying, did you deal with a lot of stress in your previous job? I was like, no, like, I don't really think so. I feel like I'm fine. And she's like, do you feel like you didn't really deal with a lot of stress, or do you feel like you actually had a lot of stress in your life and you just dealt with it effectively? And I was like, no, I think it was the first one. Like, I don't think my job was that stressful, and I meditate, I do yoga. Like, I don't really have an issue decompressing. So like, I think it's the first one. So that's like the mindset I've been operating from. I was like, I'm not that stressed out. And then I was telling her how once COVID hit, I was like, oh, I started sleeping 9 hours a night for the first time ever. And I think I just realized, like, I'm someone who needs 9 hours of sleep, who just never got 9 hours of sleep. And I haven't slept this much since middle school, and it feels so good. And she stopped me and she was like, actually, Julia, like, I want to go back on that point that you just said about stress. Because here's the thing with stress. The level of baselines that we should be measuring from is when you go on vacation and you do nothing for a couple of days, and then your nervous system completely relaxes, right? And like, you're in that state of just complete peace. Anything above that is something that we consider stress. So that is what we should be measuring from. And stress isn't, necessarily good or bad, but like, that's the ground zero that we're looking at, like, volume of stress from. And as she was saying this to me, I realized that I had not taken a vacation like that in God knows how long. Like, all of my vacations even are just activities, packed onto activities. I usually take vacations just adding onto a couple days onto a work trip, whatever. And I usually come back from my vacations exhausted, and then I just jump into work. And I was like, holy crap. Like, I can't remember the last time that my stress levels were like at that kind of baseline. And it made me recognize how much I had been operating from this work hard, play hard mentality, and how deeply it was wired into me without even noticing it. And I don't blame my job or anything for that. I think especially in the team we were on at Google, there was a really big emphasis on healthy work-life balance and all of that. But I think it's more just the culture that we live in. We really glamorize being busy. We glamorize just doing stuff nonstop. I definitely did. I would say, especially throughout my early 20s, like I'd work such long days and I'd be out all weekend. And I just like would think that I didn't really need to sleep or I could get off. I could function off of 6 hours of sleep and nap on the Google bus on my commute. And I took a lot of pride in that. So I really had to unlearn what it meant to constantly be doing. And because I had this space, because I give myself this time off, I really needed to dive deep into that. And my partner, who is a wonderful human, like I came home and I told him this and I was like crying because it was just such a big revelation for me. And he also gives me the tough love when I need it, where he said, Julia, not every moment has to be learning something new or saving the world. You don't have to be productive every second of every day. Also, you're on fun employment right now. If you want to sit on the couch watching TV all day, no one's going to judge you. You can do that. And he's telling me this. He's telling me it's okay to sit on the couch all day, do nothing. I'm thinking in my head, like, I never let myself do that before. I always was like, I have to be doing something productive. Like I have to be reading a book, or even like the mindfulness practices, even just meditating or doing yoga. It was always like a checkbox to complete. It was like, this is for my self-care. This is for my wellness. This is, in service of my futures. And so I would say like the first lesson that I really learned is around like what it means to consciously be resting. And I would say for the next couple of weeks, especially after those conversations, my boyfriend would come out of the office and find me sitting on the couch and I'd just be watching TV. And he's like, oh, what's up? And I'd say, I'm practicing resting. Like I'd literally be like, okay, Julia, you're going to sit on the couch today and you're not going to do a productive thing. Like you're just going to relax, you're going to watch TV, or you're just going to lay here and you're going to do completely nothing and you're going to be okay with it. And I had to force myself into that. And now I feel like I have a much healthier relationship with it. Like now, for example, if let's say I'm feeling tired in the middle of the day, I'm like, it's okay if I want to take a 10-minute nap or a 2-hour nap, right? It's helped me develop a healthier relationship around when my body is fatigued or when my mind is fatigued. And then still like practicing that it's okay to rest mantra. It's okay to take time out of your day. It's okay to do nothing and just lay there and be unproductive. And it's really a cliche at this point, right? Like you're a human being, not a human doing. But I think a lot of us could use practice around actually just being and just being without doing. I think it's a hard thing to be or to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm laughing over here because I do the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's exhausting, but I don't even realize it. And I think you're right. I think it's the culture. Google is that way too, but Google is just an American company operating within this culture that we have. I think a lot of people need to hear that not every moment needs to be productive. And I mentioned my friend Dan Silvera earlier to you. We were having a catch up and he asked, how's the passion project? And he gave me a perspective on myself that I hadn't really thought of. He said, I think that you're finding more balance with your passion projects. He and I used to live together and he saw me always constantly striving and really getting caught up in this idea that I need to be an entrepreneur and I need to leave Google and I need to do all these things. There was no rest. It was just constantly trying to do something. And even when I wasn't doing something, it was like, I should be listening to a podcast or I should be listening to an audiobook or something, just constantly improve myself. And so he said, oh, you're finding more balance with that, it seems like. And I was like, yeah, maybe a little bit, but at the same time, still not. Like I'm still constantly striving. This podcast is another effort at striving. I think my relationship with it is better than my projects in the past where it was like, I need to do this. It needs to happen so I can get to this better state where this podcast, I'm not doing this to make it a full-time job or make a lot of money with it. I'm doing this as an exploration, but I still find myself caught up in needing to do it, thinking it needs to grow faster, adding a million things to a to-do list, and just constantly caught up in this idea that I need to be doing more and better and faster. And no rest. There's no rest.
Yeah, I think it's a trap that a lot of high achieving people fall into because the thing is, it's not a bad thing to have high standards. And this is why I've struggled with it in the past because I was like, no, I am someone that is constantly creative and curious and I want to learn. And that's not a bad thing to always be in search of becoming a better version of yourself. But I think it's so important to find this line of balance because you want to be doing these things from a place of already knowing your worth. So for you and your project, like for your podcast to be an expression of your potential, of your creativity, of this gift that you bring to the world, but not falling into the other side of the camp of saying, oh, but I'm not worthy until I achieve X, Y, and Z with my podcast. I'm not an Adam I can be proud of until I release however many podcast episodes. And so I think that's the challenging piece of walking this fine line between having really high expectations for yourself and also building this really strong foundation of being in this place of self-love and self-compassion where it's like, it's okay. I know that I am a worthy person, even if today I'm tired and I can't do X, Y, and Z with regards to this project I have, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's an ongoing exploration and coming to terms with all of that. In the past, it's very much been from a place of scarcity and a place of lack. Like, I need to do this so I can overcome that and be worthy and be good enough. And of course, there's a whole thing about the approval from others through podcast stats or comments or approval and just acknowledgement. There's a whole thing there as well. But it's totally different than coming from a place of I'm worthy, I'm enough, and I'm doing this because I want to be creative and explore this world of podcasting. It's not like I need this to be something. I can just do it from a place of worthiness. That's something I'm constantly going back and forth with.
Yeah, because it is a practice. We're never going to get it perfect.
Yeah, this idea of rest that you're talking about, I think, is so powerful. And some people don't have this problem. They just chill. And it's funny because I consider myself a chill person. Yeah, like,
I mean, I thought I was too.
The comment from your boyfriend is so spot on. Not every moment needs to be filled with something. And I think my wife is better at that than me as well. She does what she needs to do. And then she chills on the couch and watches the Olympics or watches Real Housewives or whatever she wants to watch. And there's not this constant need to be like doing stuff to prove stuff that I feel, even if I won't call it that.
And I know it's also driven by my perfectionism, this desire to have every moment be some kind of perfect, like getting the most out of that moment. But just being okay with life is just life. And the quality of the moments that you're having isn't necessarily based on exactly what you're doing in that moment, but it's by how present you are when you're in that moment. So how can you just rest and watch TV or do nothing, but like fully lean into the enjoyment of that doing nothing and the pleasure of just relaxing and sitting on the couch, noticing how good it feels to rest your body and not have to be dealing with all the stressors that you've been dealing with before. So
I'm actually going on vacation next week down to the beach in Delaware.
Okay.
I've never been to Delaware, but it was available and it's within driving distance. And so we're going to do that. And I'm not going to bring my laptop. I'm not going to work on the podcast. I'm not going to do anything related to the podcast. I'm not going to do anything related to work. And I'm just going to be there and chill. I might read about architecture because I'm interested in it. I don't know. Maybe I'm still trying to be productive, but we'll see. And if I don't, I don't. Like, I just want to chill.
And just look at it as your practice chilling. I think we all need to practice resting. So it's okay if you're not perfectly unproductive the entire time, but enjoy it for what it is. Yeah. And be grateful that you carved out that space for yourself too.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And you mentioned conscious rest. What does that word mean to you, conscious rest?
I guess I can try and define conscious rest by defining unconscious rest. To me, unconscious rest is just like you're sleeping because you have to, or you're so tired that you literally have no energy left and that you are already completely depleted. And so you're crashing. Whereas I'd say conscious rest is, I think, just being really mindful of your energy levels and knowing when you're dipping below a certain point. So if you think about your energy levels as a battery, right? Like knowing when you're at 20%, knowing when you're at 10%, and then fully acknowledging that and asking yourself, what is going to be the most supportive form of rejuvenation for me right now? So Is it that I am at 30% and I have a big day tomorrow? And so something that I can do tonight is let me just take a bath. I know it'll settle me in for the evening and I'll be able to fully charge to 100%. Or maybe it's like you're actually at 5% and you've had an incredibly stressful day. And I'm actually just going to cry a lot because that's a form of consciously resetting. And that's going to help renew my emotional reserves or whatever it is, because you just have to get it out. But I think it's just being really aware of where you are. And this is where mindfulness comes in too. Tuning in and checking in with yourself to know what levels are you at within your battery, and then seeing, okay, and what should I do about it? In the past, especially when I was working the normal schedule, it's like I get to maybe 2 or 3 p.m. and I start feeling tired. I just say, no, let me just push through the next 2 hours and get to 5, and then I'll sign off and do my thing for the evening. But I'd say if I'm going to approach it from a conscious resting point, it's like, oh, I'm starting to feel depleted in the middle of the afternoon. Let me just shut my screen for 15 minutes. That's all it takes. And maybe I'll go up on my roof and get some fresh air, or maybe I'll just lay down for 10 minutes or walk around my house or something. And then you have the remaining 2 hours of the day, or remaining now hour and 45 of the day, slightly less time, but it's about the quality of the time, not necessarily the quantity. So I think that when it comes to resting too, the quality of that rest and the intentionality behind it, rather than just the quantity and just doing it by the wayside.
Yeah, thank you for going into that. I think that makes a ton of sense. It's really about bringing that awareness to how are you feeling? And I like the battery analogy, like what percentage am I at of energy left? And then what do I need? Asking yourself, what do I need in this moment? What would support me in this moment? And then going and doing that thing.
Yeah.
I think it's easier said than done. For me, like what percentage am I at now? I don't know. I think the more you start to pay attention to that, probably the easier it gets.
Yeah. Or even just having the framework, right? Even just thinking about it as, oh, let me think about my energy levels as a battery. And once you have that, then you're like, oh, okay, like I could probably guess, like I'm at least between 40 and 60%. You don't have to know it exactly, but sometimes it's just asking yourself the simple question, and then you'll probably find the answer soon enough.
Yeah. And you know, if your battery's dead or your battery's full.
Yeah. It'll help you not have to get below 20%. Because I think sometimes people just don't realize they are tired until they're under 10%. And then they're really tired, or they're really emotionally distraught, or like they're taking out on other people. But if you're having a more conscious relationship with it, then you're like, oh, I'm now below 30%. Let me recharge a bit and get back up to an optimal functioning level.
Yeah, absolutely. So Julia, it sounds like this aspect of creating space and really practicing rest was a huge part of this time off for yourself. The other big part that we talked about in the last episode and you've mentioned on this episode is refining your vision of what it is you wanted to do in this next chapter of your life as you moved into the sustainability space. As we talked about last time, you didn't really know what area of sustainability you wanted to go into. Can you talk a little bit more about how you went about refining that vision?
Yeah, especially during the first 3 months when I was looking to learn a lot, I was just seeking out any channels that I could. So I was reading some books. I started subscribing to a ton of different sustainability newsletters just to see what was happening, in the world at this current point in time, like what are the trends in the marketplace. I would then go and find any kind of talks that I could listen to, because a lot of these online websites or newsletters, sometimes they'll have webinars. So I just listen to those webinars. I started making a list of cool companies that were doing cool things. And so I have this whole spreadsheet with 70 something rows where just write down cool companies, where they were based, what sector they were in, what they were doing. And I was like, okay, when I start the job search, maybe I'll look at these companies. And then I was also talking to a lot of people. So as I mentioned earlier, I tapping all these different channels as a way of getting in touch with different people. But really my goal was just to see what it was like living in the day-to-day life of someone that was working within a particular sector of sustainability. And I already knew that I wanted to go into food, or that's what I thought I wanted to go into. And so I was really just trying to confirm that, hey, is food sustainability actually the area I want to go into? So that's where most of my newsletters and my company searches and my conversations were focused. I would say in terms of reaching out to people on LinkedIn and just blind reaching out, there's obviously a lot of fear around this. I think we've probably all heard the networking advice. If you are going to talk to someone, you have to offer them something of value in return. If that's true networking, quote unquote. I'm going to be honest with you, is I was like, I don't really have value to offer these people. Like, I am someone who knows nothing about the industry and I really just want to learn about their jobs. And that is quite honestly the approach that I went with. I just sent pretty authentic, honest messages to these people. And I just said, hey, I'm looking to make a career transition. What you're doing sounds super cool. You have a job that sounds like I might be interested in doing in the future. If you'd be willing to, I'd just love to talk to you for 30 minutes and learn more about your career. And people were pretty receptive. Like I said, I got like 4 or 5 conversations just out of those LinkedIn messages. I think it took a lot of getting over that hump of feeling like I'm not worthy of having this conversation or that this person isn't going to want to talk to me, just putting myself out there in order to get to that point. And what I learned from that is that people generally want to help you if they have time, if they're capable, if they, have the bandwidth and like they do want to help you. Maybe this is special, the sustainability space. It's something I've really experienced that people in the space really just want to help each other because there is this broader mission in mind. And now that I say that, maybe it's not just sustainability, maybe it's any sort of mission driven type of work that you want to get into, whether it's social justice or whether it's mental health. I think generally there is this desire to collaborate and to create better outcomes for everyone. So I do feel really lucky in that aspect. I'm really grateful to all the people who are willing to give up their time to share with me what their experience was like. One thing I think about too is how can I pay this forward? Like maybe I can't give this person something of value, but how can I hopefully help someone else down the line? I know that there was one person, they were launching like a climate change focused board game. And they were asking if there was anyone that had experience with advertising online. Obviously, I worked in Google AdWords. So I just reached out to him. I was like, hey, like, I'm willing to help you. And I'm doing that from a place of there's all these people that have helped me. Let me see how I can help other people as well. So I think that's maybe one tip for people to get over that hump of just like reaching out to people and talking to people and trying to get their advice. So yeah, it was definitely really helpful to talk to so many people and just learning about the industry, learning about the challenges in the industry. For me, solidifying like this is the area that I'm passionate about and want to get into. So that was more on the job search side of things. I would say in terms of grad school, one of my mentors, our friend Zach, who introduced us, Zach, if you're listening, that's your shout out. Zach gave me great advice around figuring out if I wanted to go to grad school, which is he said, look at the companies you want to work for, look at the people that are working for them, and then see if you actually need a grad school degree to get into those positions. Or is it something you can work your way into? So that was a tip I was keeping in mind. And then I talked to people who were in the programs that I was in and people who had graduated from the programs I was in and just asking them like, what are you getting the most out of your experience? How has this experience gotten you to where you are today? Do you think you could have gotten to where you are today without this? And what I realized, at least for me, is that a lot of what the people had learned in grad school, I felt like were things I'd already learned at Google. And it was things like presentation skills and being able to get up in front of a room and talk to people and being an effective communicator and convince someone of your point of view. I felt like I'd already learned those on the job. And the other piece of grad school, a big piece of it is networking. But I was already going out and doing that networking on my own. And I was like, I feel like I can build these relationships myself. I can build authentic relationships just by finding people who are genuinely passionate about this. In terms of refining your vision for me, I was really considering grad school. I ended up applying, I ended up getting in. And then as I kept having these conversations, it's like figuring out what is actually going to get me closer to my end goal. And for me, cutting out grad school and realizing this is not going to get me closer. So I feel like when you're refining your vision, you just have to try on a lot of different things and put on a lot of shoes and see what fits. So that was one shoe I realized for me did not fit. And then I would say the last piece was I was journaling a lot. I think I've journaled more in the past couple of months than I have in the past few years. I was in this phase of a huge amount of uncertainty and not knowing what was coming up and also not even really knowing what I wanted. And I read back on some of my journal entries and some of them are like, I don't really know what I want out of my future job, but let me just write down like the things I think I want right now. And it's like, oh, I think I want to work for a company that is like in food or like is a tech solution or whatever. I was just writing down all these sort of ideas. And I read on these entries, oh, like here's what I thought I wanted at that point in time. And eventually I realized, oh, actually that one is not a criteria. Or it's like, here's what I think I'm going to do with my life and the timeline that I'm going to look at. And it's like, oh, like this isn't really what happened. But that process just helps you get more in tune with the kinds of thoughts that are going in your mind and like putting them down on paper. And like I said, like whittling away, right? Like seeing what fits, what doesn't fit. And gradually you get clearer and clearer. And I think journaling also really helped me just deal with the uncertainty of the time, of leaning into that uncertainty and like embracing it. Because I would say about 2 months in, I had this point where I started panicking and I was like, oh my gosh, what if the right opportunity is going to slip me by because I'm not job hunting right now? And I was like, what if I'm not acting fast enough? What if there's that perfect job out there, but I don't know it because I haven't started applying? I was like, should I start applying? And I really had to pull myself back. And I had a journal entry on this where I said to myself, I was like, hey, you spent months preparing for this time off. Like you spent months agonizing over making this decision. And now you're in it. You gave yourself this sabbatical for a reason. And once it passes by, you're never going to get this time back again. So really trust in the wisdom of your past self, of knowing that you needed this. And also trust in, the future, your future self, that you are going to get that dream job that you want, that trust in the universe that it's going to help you get yourself there. So journaling, I think, was a big tool in terms of just leaning into that trust piece and confronting that anxiety piece. And I remember too, I wrote a mantra to myself because not knowing what's coming up next is really scary. But I was like, there's another perspective, which is that it's also really exciting because anything could happen. And so I wrote this mantra to myself where I said, I celebrate uncertainty and I delight in not knowing what comes next. And I just repeat this to myself. Anytime I started getting really like worked up over being like, oh, like, I just wish I knew. I just like wish I knew I had the security of something that is the right fit coming down the line. I was like, no, like this is really fun, actually, Julia. It's really fun to not know what's going to happen. And you should celebrate that any door could be the one that you could walk through in the future. You just have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's a big one around getting clear on your vision, because you're going to go through phases of just not knowing what that vision is. And that vision is going to take time to solidify. So the more you can become friends with that space of not knowing, then the better you're going to feel, the more you're going to be open to any kind of potential outcome. And then also, I just think the better you feel at the other side of it. You're like, wow, I got through all of that uncertainty with this sense of trust. And now here I am. And this place I'm in right now is even better than I could have expected before.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot there that I resonate with. I feel like I'm right now in a time where I'm questioning what is the future. I have all my random side visions, like building the skate park casita in my backyard and working with Camp Woodward on some mindfulness stuff. But those are like medium term things. So I think we're both doing the artist's way. Are you still doing the artist's way?
I actually have not started reading that. I told you I wanted to. So it's another book on my list. I will get to it. But
all right.
Yeah,
no worries.
Please tell me about how it's applying to your life. And I'm glad that you're doing it.
Yes. When it comes up 3 times on the podcast, I should probably go check it out. Like the universe is trying to tell me to explore that. I have this concept, which Eric, our mutual friend, mentioned on episode 31, that he did it during his sabbatical and it was really helpful. Yeah. One of the things that it has you do is the concept of morning pages, which is journaling, right? It's essentially stream of consciousness journaling. Whatever comes to mind, write it down. And don't even look at it. Maybe at some point it's going to have you look at it. It's all about unlocking and unblocking our creativity. It has these basic beliefs that I'm supposed to be reading every morning and every night now. I read them this morning, which is good. But it's like we are creative beings and life is just a flow of creation. And more and more, I'm starting to realize that makes a ton of sense. We're constantly changing and growing. And I think it's like every 7 years, every cell in your body will be completely new. And so we're constantly creating and being created. So this morning pages thing, I was doing my morning pages today. And the idea is that you write 3 pages and just get out whatever's in your head. And I was thinking, like, what is my vision 10 years from now? What do I want my life to look like 10 years from now? And I was pretty unimpressed with what I was writing down. It was like, it was cool. It was fine. But what you were saying before about even if you're not super clear, using journaling as a tool to just get some ideas down on paper. What do I think it might be? It's not like because I put it on paper, it has to happen. And it has to happen in that way. It's working through these ideas and just getting them on paper and exploring them and refining them and just allowing that to flow, so to speak, has been really helpful. Another aspect of what it talks about and suggests is called artist dates. And basically you go do something that interests you and just by yourself, and you go somewhere. Like this week, I didn't have a ton of time, but I went to this town nearby called Red Bank, and it's like a little downtown, like a mini Jersey City type thing. And I just walked around. I'd driven through and been there a bunch of times, but I've never just like wandered around. And the idea with these artist dates is like, they call it like stocking the pond. Like if you're going to go fishing in a pond, someone's got to put the fish there at some point, but so they consider it like allowing images to come into your mind and ideas to come into your mind. And just by seeing things, like I saw some murals and I saw the river and I saw a bunch of restaurants and shops and things that I hadn't seen before. And I smelled smells. Like I walked past this incense store and I smelled the incense. Getting back to what you were saying about the conversations you were having and the things, the talks you were listening to and the webinars and all of that, I've really been trying to approach my exploration of this Artist's Way book in that way, where it's like, nothing may come of this, but I'm going to put it out there and I'm going to see what happens. That will allow me to explore this little part of the vision and see if it is anything. Like I was telling you earlier on the last episode with Dan Arwady, episode 39, I mentioned that I wanted to teach mindfulness at this Camp Woodward that I had gone to because I'm now an adult rollerblader, as I was joking before. But since then, I have reached out to them and found that they were hiring for a wellness position and made a connection with the director of health and wellness for them, who's building a program like this and might be collaborating with them on it in some way, shape, or form. And maybe that's not what I'm doing 10 years from now, but it interests me now. And so that's going to help me figure out how I get to what I ultimately want. And journaling and putting yourself out there really allow you to start working with that vision. It's a really long way to say all that.
Absolutely. Because when you write things down, I think once you get it on paper and then let's say you look back on it, then you're like, oh, this is a yes and this is a no. And you tangibly have that sense. It's the same with doing something, right? For you, like doing this wellness thing with Camp Woodward, like you're going to do it. And then once you've done it, you can say, oh, I want to keep doing stuff like this, or I don't want to. So you just have to put yourself out there, as you were saying, and do it and try it on. And then you're continually refining because again, as you said as well, we are creative beings and we're continually changing throughout our lifetimes, or our interests change. And that's part of the journey, right? It's fun to explore all these different sides of yourself as a multifaceted human, where you are a dad and a Googler and a podcast host and a wellness coordinator and a rollerblader. Like, how awesome that you get to be all of these things. Yeah.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. Julia, thank you so much for being here on the Mindful Fire podcast and updating us on everything that's happened. I feel like we've been talking for 2.5 hours, so we might make this 2 episodes.
Wow, that's exciting. Thank you so much for having me, Adam. This was so much fun. It was so great to catch up with you again as well. I don't know if there's a part 3, but looking forward to the next time we catch up again.
Yes, there could always be a part 3. I'm sure there will be because you're going into this new chapter. Thanks so much for joining me on this episode of the Mindful Fire podcast. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with my friend Julia Lee. If you haven't yet, I highly recommend listening to part 1 of our conversation, episode 15. You can find that wherever you're listening to this or at mindfulfire.org/15. If you got value from today's episode, please hit subscribe. This just lets the platforms know you're getting value from the episodes and you want to be here when I produce additional content. If you'd like to spread the word about the podcast, I'd really appreciate you sharing your favorite episode with a couple of friends. It would mean the world to me and would help spread the word about the podcast to new people. As a reminder, you can find the full show notes for today's episode, including all of the books, resources, and links we discuss at mindfulfire.org/56. Thanks again. I'll catch you next time on the Mindful Fire podcast.